Crispin. As Crispin has just said, we have just returned from a very successful visit to Brazil, which continued to strengthen our very good fraternal and political relations with Brazil. But the visit has underscored the need to strengthen more trade and defense cooperation between the two countries. These are two democracies that can achieve a lot if we work together on a number of trade issues. Brazil has got a lot of advanced technology, research, as the president mentioned, in Brasilia, that South Africa can gain from. And also South Africa has got a lot of abilities that Brazil can gain from. We just need to strengthen and work more together to build up on our trade. We have also returned from the funeral of the late civil rights activist, Reverend Jesse Jackson, which were warmly and gladly welcomed by the American population, including and in particular Black Americans, who have shared with us their history of anti-apartheid activism and their continued willingness to work with the democratic South Africa to use their skills to develop our country and build beyond the 30 years of our democracy. We will, from tomorrow, the 12th to the 13th of March 2026, host SADC Council of Ministers here in the DERCO building. This session of Council of Meeting of Ministers is in our capacity as interim chair of the Council of Ministers of SADC, which is aimed to implement the theme of the 45th SADC Summit as adopted in August 2025 in Madagascar, in which the theme was, and it still is, advancing industrialization, agricultural transformation, and energy transition for a resilient SADC. As it may be recalled, South Africa in November 2025 was elected as the interim chair of SADC until August 2026. This was due to the unconstitutional changes of power in Madagascar. This meeting will also take stock of a number of SADC initiatives. It is preceded by a standing committee of senior officials and a special meeting of senior officials and experts on the Regional Indicative Strategic Development Plan, the RISDP 2020-2030 of SADC, which is a 10-year framework designed to deepen Southern African Development Community, regional integration and development, which has been held from the 4th to the 10th of March 2026 to prepare the draft agenda and report to the Council of Ministers. This will feed into all the other sectoral meetings that my colleagues and counterparts will hold here in South Africa and in Zimbabwe. Because of the unique nature of the interim chairing now of SADC, which we had to take over, we have agreed to share this responsibility with Zimbabwe. So some meetings will be held in South Africa, some will be held in Zimbabwe. And we can be able to share with you which ones will be held in South Africa, which ones will be held in Zimbabwe. If you're asking yourself which meetings, there will be sectoral meetings like meetings of ministers of finance, meetings of ministers of trade, meetings of ministers of minerals, those meetings. So they will be shared between ourselves and Zimbabwe for us to be able to absorb and carry this institution. It is important that SADC continues to function as an institution that must preserve the protocols of SADC and build on regional integration. South Africa's leadership is distinctively reflected in our stewardship of Agenda 2063, ensuring the continent's development blueprint remains on track. In this regard, I have also been elected to chair the monitoring plan and mechanism of Agenda 2063 of the African Union. This commitment must help us achieve the Agenda 2063 of the African Union, and we continue to contribute to the implementation of the flagship program of the African Union, the AFCTA. We have also demonstrated our commitment to the African Union when we chaired the Committee of Five Summit on South Sudan, on the margins of the African Union Summit in Addis Ababa in Ethiopia. We are looking forward to support the work of South Sudan to exit from the revitalized peace agreement. And the only way to exit this agreement is by South Sudan holding its first democratic elections, which are expected to be held at the end of this year in December 2026. We understand the fragility of the agreement and the challenges that they are having in compliance with the agreement. But South Africa remains prepared with its counterpart in the Committee of Five to hold all the parties together to account and to hold them by hand towards their first democratic elections. With regards to the Middle East, the escalation of tension in the Middle East heralds great anxiety and uncertainty in the region and the world. These global challenges demand greater solidarity and unity, especially amongst countries in the South. As such, this matter continues to be looked into and seized. We continue to be seized with this matter as South Africa. I have had calls with my counterparts in the GCC states to express solidarity with them on the account of what is happening in the region. The South African government is monitoring the situation and with concern that the conflict has resulted in the destruction of civilian infrastructure across the region. This has also resulted in inflationary pressures, energy insecurity, and food insecurity as a result of the fertilizer shocks in the agricultural sector. South Africa reiterates its condemnation for the violation of Article 2.4 of the UN Charter by the United States and Israel, and the subsequent action of Iranian government, which through their response also violated the provisions of Article 51 and breached the sovereignty and territorial integrity of the GCC states, in particular where there was no evidence that the first strike by the US and Israel came from the GCC countries. The United Nations Security Council, now more than ever, is called upon to prioritize humanity over geopolitical preferences. This is an existential moment for multilateralism, which must reverberate in all conflict areas, including Sudan, South Sudan, and the Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo. We continue to urge all our citizens currently in the Middle East region to contact the respective South African embassies accredited to their countries of residence to ensure that they are registered with and that their whereabouts are known to the embassies, that in times of need and crisis, it's easy to communicate. Citizens traveling abroad for any reasons, whether it be for business, education, holiday, amongst others, are reminded to register with the South African Embassy's consulate nearest to the destinations they are visiting. The list of contact details for missions abroad can be found on the department's website or the website of the various South African embassies and consulates. Citizens are also encouraged to download and register on the DERCO Travel Smart app, where you can also include details of your next of kin and log a case with the South African mission should you find yourself in distress while abroad. South African citizens are also advised to continue to monitor government platforms as well as reports from their residence countries for any relevant information and updates. We also continue to advise our citizens to check and verify job opportunities across the globe so that they don't fall prey to schemes and fraudsters across the globe on work opportunities or job opportunities that do not exist, and sometimes finding themselves falling into conflict zones and areas. With regards to our US relations, the Department of International Relations and Cooperation has noted recent public remarks made by the United States Ambassador to South Africa. While South Africa welcomes active public diplomacy and the strengthening of bilateral ties, we emphasize that such engagements must remain consistent with established diplomatic etiquette and international protocols. In this regard, we have called in the Ambassador of the United States, Ambassador Boselli, to explain his undiplomatic remarks. And in his engagements and visits to various sites in South Africa, including the Apartheid Museum, District 6, and other historical places. In the engagements, he acknowledges that given our history, South Africa needs redress and is willing to work with us constructively in this regard. I will later allow the Director General, Mr. Zane Dengo, to elaborate further on the discussion with the US Ambassador. South Africa has consistently affirmed that the United States is a vital strategic partner for our economy and geopolitical issues, particularly on peace and security across the world. This relationship is not a one-sided relationship. South African companies maintain a significant investment in the United States, proportionate to our economy. It will not be possible for us to have the same size of investment to the US, given our economy size compared to the United States. But we have got some presence there, including in sectors such as energy and chemicals. Sasol is one of our leading companies invested in the USA. But there are also other South African companies that are there. And South Africa remains a leading supplier of critical minerals to the US. We continue to emphasize that critical minerals, there must be value addition in South Africa and in the African continent. And this is a partnership we look forward to continue to build with the United States. We reiterate that broad-based black economic empowerment is not reverse racism, as regrettably insinuated by the ambassador. It is a fundamental instrument designed to address the structural imbalances of South Africa's unique history. It is a constitutional imperative that the South African government can and will never abandon. Approximately 500 US companies currently operate in South Africa, employing over 250,000 people. These firms operate in full compliance with our domestic laws, including assisting us to address historical injustice through legislated BEE equivalent programs. This is a mutually beneficial relationship. The bilateral trade between the two countries can grow, but we should not behave as if South Africa's contribution is inconsequential to this relationship. South Africa has been one of the largest importers of American products on the continent. The bilateral trade between the two countries is valued at $15 billion from our side. We view these requirements as a form of localization, a standard economic tool used globally to foster domestic growth. While our policies possess specific features to address historical injustice, they are aligned with international investment practices. Even in the US, they do have localization, given their unique environment. As we cannot tell President Trump how to deal with localization in the US, he also can't tell us how to deal with our domestic issues of sovereignty. South Africa remains committed to the rule of law. The Expropriation Act, number 13 of 2024, is not intended to undermine property rights. Expropriation without compensation is a measure of last resort, or expropriation with nil compensation, subject to rigorous procedural safeguards and strictly limited to the 5 specific conditions outlined in Section 13 of the Act. These safeguards ensure that land reform is conducted in a manner that is just, equitable, and sustainable. On the question of rural safety, it's not a phenomenon limited only to white people. It affects all South Africans, black, white, colored, and Indians. As you remember, when we were in the White House, the president did state that this is not an intention to persecute white people in South Africa. Everyone is affected by the high level of crime in our country, and we have to respond to that. But we have also responded to the issue of rural safety. And in this regard, our South African police had a meeting with the American embassy in 2025, early 2025, to give them the report on our priority with regards to rural safety. Fully fledged report of what we're doing, what are the budgets, and who is involved. And some of the stakeholders have also participated in this process. As a sovereign state and a significant middle power, South Africa's foreign policy is anchored in our constitutional commitment to multilateralism and the peaceful settlement of disputes. South Africa's non-alignment does not entail a preference for any geopolitical bloc. Rather, it represents our ability to engage all international partners and take positions on a case-by-case basis, guided by our human rights outlook and international law. We remain steadfast in our resistance to being drawn into great power constellations, prioritizing instead a global governance system that is fair and inclusive. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Minister TG. Do you want to come now, or should we take questions? Okay. We'll take questions. Let's start at the back. I'm being discriminatory. Okay.
Minister, from IT. Minister, I know you said you've noted the comments by the ambassador of the United States, but the EFF is now calling for the expulsion of the ambassador to Pretoria. My question is, what is the ambassador still doing in Pretoria, and are you considering the expulsion as well?
Minister, could you confirm that you officially received from the United States a letter with 5 demands? And in speaking with contact with your counterpart, American counterpart, did they ever mention the idea to leave BRICS, South Africa to the BRICS?
Hi, good evening, Minister. Kylie Shekman here from SADC News. I just wanted to get a sense, Minister, with regards to the U.S. ambassador. Has he been summoned to come and account here to our Tambo building, perhaps to really provide more clarifications about some of the points of views, especially with regards to some of these policies that we have that are very pro-transformation. And also, Minister, just a brief question as well. When you had your interaction with your counterparts from the Gulf, what are they saying to South Africa? Are they saying perhaps we should, just push for diplomacy? What was the context of the conversation? Thanks so much.
I'd like to Sputnik Africa. Question for the Minister. Minister, following up on the question about the 5 demands, does South Africa view this as external pressure on South Africa's sovereign foreign policy? And if so, what is South Africa's response to this?
Just put it out. Introduce yourself. Hi, Minister Lamola from Africa International News TV. Could you kindly elaborate on the council entrance for the RISDP? That's Africa International News TV. Could you kindly please elaborate on the council entrance on the RISDP? Elaborate.
I think I'm going to take as many so that we have operates now. Anita, Diane.
Thank you very much, Minister from Africa. Just 2 questions to follow up on my colleagues. Could you just explain the nature of the engagement with the ambassador? Where did it take place? How long did the conversation take place? And you say he conceded that there should be some redress. Is there any way that you could kind of tell us what he conceded to? And then the second question is around what my colleague asked around the negotiations with or the conversations with your counterparts in GCC. Is there anything besides public comments calling for UN Security Council, etc.? Is there any tangible thing that's happening behind the scenes that South Africa is part of that we can give us some indication? Thank you very much.
Good afternoon or evening. Diane Walker-Kalubi from DW Deutsche Welle. My question relates to the South Africans who might still be either stuck or stranded in the Middle East or Gulf countries. Is South Africa considering a more coordinated approach when it comes to those people who do want to return to South Africa, as opposed to the messages which are encouraging people to make their own way back home? And President Cyril Ramaphosa mentioned that South Africa would be willing to aid in any negotiation. Is South Africa actively putting its hand up, speaking to the countries involved to try and negotiate or be part of the negotiation panel when it comes to the conflict between the US, Israel, and Iran?
Thank you. Good afternoon, Minister. It's Corinna from Kaya FM. Just 2 questions. The first is regarding assistance to South Africans who are find themselves stranded in the Middle East and maybe can't afford passage back home. Is there assistance in that regard? And then secondly, with the sea traffic around the Gulf because of the conflict, have your counterparts perhaps approached you regarding rerouting around the Cape route? How will this affect us on an economic and international basis?
Thank you very much. I think some of the questions maybe Mr. Dichi will allow, but Dichi will just to address the questions around consular services and then political issues. Dichi? Yes, please.
Crispin is very tall. Good afternoon, colleagues. So with regards to the consular assistance that the South African government is rendering to South Africans who are in distress through our embassies, particularly in the Gulf states. We've been making a call for South Africans, firstly, to register with us so that we know who is there and what type of help they need. And we've seen many people responding, utilizing the DERCO Travel Smart app, which is available on all the app stores. It allows people to register and share information with us. And we've been facilitating the repatriation, if you can call it that, or evacuation, through available commercial airlines. In the first couple of days when the attacks were happening, the airspaces were closed in all of these countries, so it was impossible to move in or out. But in the last couple of days, you've seen that the airspaces have been opened partially in some of these countries. Commercial airlines are starting to fly, and South Africans have been taking advantage of this option to then come home. We've been moving other people through land borders to cross into countries where flights are available, and South Africans have been coming home. I can also say that we were on standby, working with other security departments of the South African government. We have a plan. It's still on the table of our leadership to look at options should the current arrangement of people utilizing commercial airlines become difficult to continue with. So there is a plan, but currently commercial air flights are available, and South Africans are utilizing those to come home. I think I addressed everything related to consular matters. Thank you, Minister.
Thank you. So the question relating to the discussion with the American ambassador designate, we had a discussion today, which was in fact our second discussion since he came to the shores of South Africa. Regarding the comments that were reported on yesterday, Mr. Bozell expressed his regrets that these comments detracted from any impression that he wanted to work with us constructively. In our very first meeting, he stated very clearly that he wanted to work very constructively with the government of South Africa. So in terms of what happened yesterday, he apologized and expressed regret, and that includes the comment that appeared to be undermining the judiciary. You'll find that there's a very public apology by the mission of the US on social media to that effect. As the minister pointed out, he also reaffirmed that given our history, and he's been to a few museums, the Apartheid Museum and District 6 Museum, and based on that, he reaffirmed in the meeting that given that history, that South Africa does need redress policies and measures. So that's the spectrum of policies, including some of those that may have been in the 5 asks from the White House to us. He then concluded that he wants to continue to work constructively with ourselves and the rest of government on building a mutually beneficial relationship with South Africa and the US, and that includes looking at how the redress issues could be dealt with. Yeah. No, on the 5 demands, we did not receive any official letter on the 5 demands. These demands have emerged out of negotiations on essentially a trade-related relationship between South Africa and the US. You will recall that there was the unilateral tariffs that were imposed, and there was negotiations between South Africa and the US. These 5 demands emerged in discussions around that particular negotiations. So there's no formal demand, and that, I think there was a question on BRICS. There was no formal ask for us to not be part of BRICS. I think that in the discussions, BRICS has always been seen as a challenge to some in the administration, but there was no demand that South Africa withdraws from BRICS.
Was it a démarche against the ambassador?
It's a whenever we have a formal request for coming into a meeting and Clayton sitting next to you, the technical term is démarche.
So it was a démarche, yes.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, we took his comments with a very dim view, hence we had to call him in on this discussion. And on the issues of the 5 demands that has been raised, it has, as the DG has said, has come through the negotiations on trade. We have stated our position that the issues of trade and these demands should be separated so that Department of Trade and the DTIC and their counterparts in Washington, the ATR office, can focus and deal with the issues related to trade, tariffs, and so forth. And DERCO, with our counterparts, we can deal with the 5 demands, because these 5 demands, as you are aware, were also some of them raised during the White House meeting. And some of them we've seen them through the Truth Social posts and various social media platforms. And we read them to be meaning it is those demands. And we have reiterated our position. And as I've said here, with regards to BEE, it's a constitutional imperative. It is a sovereign domestic issue that South Africans are handling through their own processes of legislation and our own domestic platforms. The Expropriation Act, I've explained what it does. We are also handling it in our own domestic platforms. In fact, some of those that are grieved by the Expropriation Act have followed our own processes, the independent courts of South Africa, that are dealing with the issues of the challenge to the Expropriation Act, and will await that outcome. And our courts are very independent. There has never been a doubt from internally and also from any international platforms to deal with this matter or any other matter that ends up in our courts. With regards to the engagements I've had with my counterparts in the Gulf, the Gulf has issued a statement about its view about the situation in the Gulf region, but there is also bilateral engagements between ourselves and our counterparts who have expressed their own views, some of them divergent from each other, particularly on the issues of the escalation by Iran. I think most of them are very clear that they feel that they've been targeted unfairly. They didn't aid or support the US and Israel strike on Iran. They didn't use, they refused for their facilities to be used. And that is the language they put, that they, up to now, there is no evidence that any of them, other than the fact that they've got bases of a US military, but they have not agreed or supported that their facilities must be used by the US or Israel to attack Iran. So that is what they continue to reiterate. Oman was very central to, and they said to me that they believed they were very close to some form of agreement that they were supporting to facilitate And as you are aware, there were also processes that were supposed to also, negotiations that were also supposed to be concluded in Geneva that were facilitated by Oman. So they were taken by surprise when the strikes from Israel and the US started, because they thought that they were within reach of an amicable resolution. And Qatar have said that they were also involved in some kind of being a conduit of engagements to support a peaceful dialogue. And they are disappointed that it has reached the stage of escalation. And with all of them, what is clear in my discussion with them is that at this stage, there is no room of discussion that is happening or open amongst the warring parties, the US, Israel, Iran, and all the parties involved. So it seems at this stage there is nothing that is happening in terms of discussion to support de-escalation. And they will want that to happen, but unfortunately it's not happening. And as we speak, the likelihood of further escalation remains real. And that is the unfortunate part. And as South Africa, we have said that if called upon, and we have raised it with all of them, we remain ready and available to support any process to a peaceful resolution, to a ceasefire, and we have continued to call for opening up of a dialogue amongst all the warring parties towards a peaceful resolution, because we always believe that no military solution can be found in this situation that can be sustainable. It is through dialogue that a sustainable solution can be concluded. The issues relating to rerouting around our Cape Coast, I believe these are issues that the Department of Transport is seized with to support any rerouting if it becomes necessary. And we remain ready with our ports and our available resources to support such if it's necessary. And the Department of Transport can elaborate on those issues. I must further elaborate on the RISDP of SADC. The RISDP is the Regional Indicative Strategic Development Plan of SADC from 2020 to 2030. It's a 10-year framework designed to deepen Southern African Development Community regional integration and development. And the meeting that will start tomorrow with my counterparts from the SADC region is aimed to assess progress in its implementation. And this relates to how far have we gone with regional integration. In SADC, in the last report that we had received in Madagascar, our regional integration is measured at about 21%. So we want to be more ambitious. How far can we move to build on regional integration? Issues of cross-border, one-stop border posts, the regional indicative mechanisms as to how can we all have interoperability amongst our borders in the SADC region, issues of critical minerals that this region is endowed with. Our ministers of minerals are also engaging on this matter. They had a meeting on the sidelines of the mining in Daba to build on a regional strategy for critical minerals. So also on the sideline of this meeting, we will also have our own bilateral engagements with our counterparts We will also sign a tripartite agreement with Angola and the DRC on issues related also to how we can maximize our capabilities in the space of critical minerals and other issues and so forth. So it is a very opportune moment for SADC to have this meeting, to also look into the progress we are making with regards to the return to civilian constitutional democracy in Madagascar. As you are aware, they've got 24 months. The meeting will also receive a report in that regard. How far, what's happening, what measures and what support does SADC needs to do to support the processes in Madagascar. The issues of climate change and disasters, how do we respond together as a region? Issues of foot and mouth disease, how do we respond together as the region? So the RISDP, it's an indicative measure as to how far have we progressed as an indicator in dealing with all these issues that are sectoral. We receive feedback and reports from the officials and the sectors of ministers. But this will also build towards the summit in August, which will now be the summit of heads of state, which will receive the full report from all the sectoral meetings of ministers of minerals, finance, and so forth, which we will then consolidate into one report later in August and then present to the heads of states that this is what we have assessed, this is how far we have moved, and these are our recommendations going forward. And at that meeting in August, South Africa will therefore also assume or be elected to be the chair of SADC, because that is then our normal rotational term. We were called upon now to come in because of the unconstitutional changes in Madagascar. And Zambia also came in to fill the issue in relation to the incoming chair, because all of us want SADC to continue to do its job. It cannot collapse because there is a challenge in Madagascar. We have to come in, we have to ensure that our institutions are working. We support the work of regional integration, the indicators, and how we can move forward together in unison as a region to deal with the challenges of development and regional integration. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister, for that comprehensive overview. I think also just by way of information that SADC is home to 360 million people. So that's a quarter of Africa's population in the southern tip of Africa. So it's a really, really important gathering. I'll invite Mr. Huete to then read the messages that are on the digital platform, and then after the responses that will conclude our press conference.
All right, thank you. Good evening, Minister. It's been sent by journalists who are following the briefing virtually. The first set of questions comes from Karen Duplessis, who is with the Africa Report. She says, have BRICS countries met to discuss the Iranian conflict, and did Iran participate in that meeting? And she's also asking another question, is there a discussion in the SADC region about the possibility of oil or diesel or petrol import rationing should the conflict in Iran continue? Then her last question, she says, South Africa chaired the C5 meeting on the conflict in South Sudan on the sidelines of the AU summit, but since then the conflict has escalated. Do you consider it as a snap to President Ramaphosa's efforts? Then the second question comes from Isa from the Middle East Eye. He's asking, is South Africa speaking to India about its support for the war in Iran? How does this impact South Africa's ties with New Delhi as it moves further into the US-Israel nexus? The The South African government has continuously been accused of being sponsored by Iran. Do you see this accusation coming directly from we see this accusation coming directly from the Israeli Prime Minister's office? How has this impacted diplomatic ties with other countries? Then the next question comes from Ronald Lamola from the Full View. Says Ambassador Bozel was no supporter of South African liberation organizations during the 1980s. He put such views in writing. Why did South Africa not refuse to accept his ambassadorial appointment? What is South Africa's official position? Also, that was the second question. What is South Africa's official position on the US attacks on Iran? Then the next question comes from Sophie Mukwena, who says, Minister Lamola, did you communicate with Iran raising these issues that were communicated to you by the Gulf region countries? And the last question is from Alex Smith, who says, will we, South Africa, work closely with the EU if our relations with the US and Israel fail due to the ongoing conflict in the Middle East? And Alex is from German TV. Thank you. Thank you.
I think those are all the questions. There are no other follow-up questions in the room. Going once. Okay. Yes.
So I think there's been no formal meeting of BRICS to discuss the situation in Iran. It may come up in the BRICS meetings as India is the chair of BRICS. And they'll be convening meetings in the regular course of their chairship. And this issue will undoubtedly come up and we'll be able to feedback what the results of those issues are. But we did not also have bilateral on that. As the minister's been saying, he's been engaging with the GCC foreign ministers, but we've also been engaging with Iran on our views and basically very clearly stating that while we understand they have the right to self-defense, it can only be directed at those who have attacked them. And therefore, our engagement with the GCC states has been that the attacks did not emanate from their territory. So, and the questions also then very specifically ask about our position on the war. Our position has been very clear, and I think the minister said that in his statement. The attacks by Israel and the US are lawful. It's a crime of aggression. It breaches Article 2.4 of the UN Charter. There was no threat or an armed attack by Iran on Israeli or US territories, and therefore it's unlawful. And therefore we also then point out that Iran's response in terms of Article 51 is also unlawful. But our view, as the minister pointed out again, is that we want to work with all, particularly with those in the Middle East, Iran and the GCC states, to find a lasting peace for them.
Yeah, with regards to the response of the DG on BRICS, I can just add that in Brazil, during our exchange with Brazil, we underscored that there is a need for an extraordinary sitting of BRICS to deal with the conflict in the Middle East. But there has not been any update so far. That discussion did happen in Brazil, in exchange of engagement on geopolitical issues. Whether there will be a discussion on the SADC region with regards to the fuel reserves if the conflict escalate. The meeting will discuss everything in terms of progress, and we will discuss some of the issues that are current. And this Natasha continues to update this department with regards to the issues of strategic fuel reserves and the impact of the conflict to the fuel price and in South Africa. That we have recently chaired the C5, we see the escalation as a snap to President Ramaphosa. No, we don't, because already when we visited Juba early this year in January, there was already escalation in South Sudan about 6 states out of the 10. There was already low level intensity and skirmishes and conflict that was clearly visible, which was part of the report to the C5 meeting, and the issues related to the arrest of first Vice President Chad. Hence, all those issues became part of the report of the C5. It became part of the discussion that there must be cessation of hostility, and we continue to persist with this matter with the C5 countries and all the stakeholders in South Sudan. The issue that there is propaganda emanating from the Prime Minister of Israel's office that we have been sponsored by Iran. Indeed, this is just propaganda. South Africa is a constitutional democracy, and everything we do, it's in the open. It's in the AG books who sponsored us to go to the ICJ. We have used the South African fiscus and South African money. It's not a secret. It's there in the report to Parliament. It's public, open information. But someone will deliberately ignore that and wants to go and hand for posts that do not exist. That the South African government is sponsored by Iran on the ICJ case and so forth. We are using the fiscus money of the South African government, and we account for it in our parliament, in our public platforms. So there is no sponsoring of anything to the South African government by the Iranian government. The views that we express with regards to the conflict in the Middle East are informed by our own national interest document, our human rights outlook, and international work. And we have been consistent that this is what informs us. And this is not only with regards to the Iranian conflict or the Middle East conflict. In Africa, we are guided by the same principles. In Russia and Ukraine, or any other conflict that we are called upon, we are guided by the same, and the UN Charter is what guides and informs our position. The ambassador who said that in the 1980s he didn't support South Africa's struggle against apartheid, and that his views were known. Yes, indeed, we knew his views, and what is currently happening and his the public posture we have anticipated. But we took a view that we view the US as a strategic, important player in geopolitics. It will be important that South Africa and the US, there is a bridge of engagement and communication. And the only platform you can do that is through the ambassador of the US, who is here now in our country. This is an opportunity. And as the DG has said, in the initial meetings, there was positive, constructive engagements that were aimed towards bridging these difficult relations that are now happening between us and the US. So we have given him a benefit of a doubt with one sole aim to bridge the gap of communication between the two countries. And it is also within that context that he was demarched here to engage him, that remember our meeting, our engagements, but these remarks are not in line with this commitment that you have made and we have made. It is gonna deteriorate the relationship, which we want to build the bridge. And there is no any other way of bridging relations when things are difficult other than to engage with those that don't agree with you. Because if we only engage with those that agree with us, then we are not bridging any gap of disagreement or of any relation. And diplomacy is also about engaging those that don't agree with you. So that is the context within which we accepted his credentials to bridge that gap. Because our understanding is that he's a guest of our president and of our country, and the mouthpiece of the White House and the American government. And this is an opportunity for us to bridge the gap. And we want to do so, and we are very genuine with this platform because we see the US as a strategic importance to South Africa, as I've stated in the statement. But this does not mean that he must act in an undiplomatic way. We will continue to monitor his comments and act appropriately and accordingly if there is no improvement in the engagement. We expect that with this engagement that we have had with him, we will return to the reset when he arrived, which was very positive, and including the videos that he released. All of you have seen them. His visit to the Apartheid Museum, which shows the painful history of our country, the history of segregation, of racism, that the Constitution wants to redress. It's not like it's something that we are making up. It's existing. So that is the context within which we have said, let's allow him to participate, because we also want to send a message to Washington that South Africa remains open to engage with Washington. And you should remember that in all the issues, South Africa has not been an aggressor to the US. We have not been provoking the White House in aggression. They have been taking issue with our domestic issues. On every domestic issue, the BEE, the Expropriation Act, and so forth and so forth. So we have not been an aggressor, and we want to continue in that line of opening up, of engagement, of being open to dialogue. And that's why we engaged the ambassador that this is undiplomatic. The other worst case scenario would have been us rejecting his application, as there was a public call. I mean, we have noted, it's not like we don't live in South Africa. We live here, we've seen the public calls. There were open letters, some of them were written to us to reject his credentials. So that would have been a worst case scenario, because that would have been an immediate escalation informed by a threat and an intention of what we have seen during his Senate hearings in Washington and so forth. But we want to have our own factual process, give him a benefit of a doubt, that maybe he had that view because he was in the US. But now that he has arrived in our country, he has visited the Apartheid Museum, he has visited District 6, he has seen the effects of land dispossession. He will visit many parts of our country and see the racial segregation in some parts, which is still reflected in our spatial planning and the economy and so forth, which is also what is reflected in his speech. The speech does acknowledge all these issues. Maybe when now he was now being asked question outside the scripted speech, then you see some of the issues coming out in a very unpalatable way. But it is that reason why we called him in and engaged that we now have 30 years of democracy because South Africans have been tolerating each other. We have built a constitution, we have built a society. It has not been easy. So he must not take us back to a polarized society along racial lines. His role as a guest is to support us to build one nation that we are continuing to build as a country. And we want all the partners, development partners, including ambassadors who are our guests here, to support this process. It has not been an easy thing to reach 30 years of democracy. And South Africans have got platforms to engage, to ventilate their issues, to mitigate and mediate some of these issues. So we will take it in that we are taking his presence here in our country in that context. I think we have exhausted all the questions. Thank you, Crispin. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. I just want to inform also a very frequently asked question that I get, and I think this is an appropriate platform, is when is Israel filing their memorial? As I understand it, it's the 13th of March. So that's the answer. 13th of March, the State of Israel is expected to file its memorial to our case. Thank you very much.
You can't take a bow one out and have it for yourself.
I was willing to